between Bill O'Reilly or Donald Trump. They both raise our temperatures, but who is the more dangerous greenhouse gas? A worthy question for Earth Day on Emil Amok's Takeout. Hi, everyone, and welcome to what I call Emil Amok's Takeout. We serve it, you take it out. If you haven't noticed, it forms the acronym EAT, or EAT, and it is time to eat. This is my takes on all things about race, society, politics, and diversity, and everything those things touch in our culture and society with respect to Asian Americans. And you don't have to be Asian American to lend us your ears. It's your minds we want. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host, and you might say, why Amok, Emil? Oh, not that again. You're going to drag that back into the thing? So why Amok? Well, the short story is that for nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of Asian Week. What was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America, Amok was the name of my compilation of essays, and Amok is on my driver's license. Not indicative of my mental state. And now the column is home based on the website of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at aaldef.org/blog, aldef.org/blog. So check it out, and if you like what you see and hear, ALDEF is a 501c3, go to the donate button. It's tax deductible. By the way, I noticed there's another show called The Takeout, except no substitutes. This is the only Amok Takeout. On this episode, it's also Earth Day, and it's more important to Asian Americans than you think. I talked to Miya Yoshitani of the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, also known as APEN. APEN is based in Oakland, and they have a legacy of victories in California against environmental racism, against Chevron in particular, and their polluting ways in Richmond, which is just north of Oakland. Hear how a Southeast Asian community stood up to the oil giant and fought for their rights, and more. All that coming up. But first, everyone is trying to jump the gun on Donald Trump's 100 days, officially on April 29th. But despite a last-minute effort coming, I'd say Earth Day is a pretty good barometer for what grade to give Donald Trump in advance. Let's see, he's put in a greenhouse gas denier to run the EPA. He's cutting billions from the budget that would signal America's leadership on the issue of climate change. And he wants to jumpstart coal like it's some answer to our energy issues. For taking us backward and for raising our temperature level, like a good greenhouse gas, on every other issue from immigration to travel bans to North Korea and the Middle East, there's only one grade. And F doesn't stand for Filipino. Now, 100 days. Trump says it's a phony benchmark. It's not. It is a symbolic way to spot an early trend of trust or lack thereof, or of competency or, once again, lack thereof. It's a way to show if the administration is on track or off the wheels. And right now, this administration is more dysfunctional than Congress. That's saying something. But Trump still seems desperate to do something about this 100-day thing, this coming week, that is. And who knows? Tax cuts? World War II and a half? 2 3/4? Trump's going to try to cram something in. I don't like it, personally, not after showing us his love of missiles and his bombs. So what kind of grade do you give him? On my website at amok.com, amok.com, leave me a voicemail. No phone necessary on SpeakPipe. We'll make that our question of the show. Give them a grade and the reason why. We'll play the good ones. Now, this is also the week of the defoxing of Bill O'Reilly. He's done books on the killing of Jesus, the killing of Patton, the killing of the rising sun. So I guess next is the killing of the O'Reilly factor. Now, I ask you, has there been a more vocal and visible cheerleader of racism and sexism in the American media other than Bill O'Reilly? This is cause for dancing in the streets. It's also appropriate that the final nail on the Fox coffin of the O'Reilly factor came when an African-American woman named Perquita Burgess, whom O'Reilly harassed and called hot chocolate, according to Burgess, stood up to the bully, and not necessarily for the money, but just to have her story known, according to her lawyer. Now, O'Reilly still gets $25 million in severance pay, settlement for his sins, and most of his fans think he's done nothing wrong and shouldn't have lost his job. So I'm sure he'll land somewhere soon. So I'm not so sure of justice here. But it does mean that Fox has paid out more than $80 million within the last year for sexual harassment cases, including O'Reilly's and former Fox head Roger Ailes' case with Gretchen Carlson. So Fox, in the corporate way, figures it can afford it. And they put a price tag on sexual harassment, under $100 million. And surely they'll pay it out again. And when it happens again, which it likely will, they'll pay it out again until the culture changes. So we can celebrate O'Reilly's firing. It's a sign of a little progress, but the vigilance must remain against the sexists and the racists of the world. And now for Earth Day. Hey, do you think Earth Day is kind of a ho-hum kind of day? Well, this is a critical time for environmentalists. I don't think there's been a more critical Earth Day in my memory. I mean, with the U.S. ready to go backward on climate change, and if you don't think it's an Asian American issue, think again. Miya Yoshitani is the executive director of the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. She talks about how environmental racism is an Asian American issue. And when she talked to me, we began discussing the importance of Earth Day, especially this one. I guess Earth Day is kind of special. It's like the Super Bowl for environmentalists like you, right? What does Earth Day mean to you?
Well, Earth Day is an opportunity to share what our vision is for a clean and healthy environment with our neighbors, with our communities. It's an opportunity to talk about the environment as something where people are actually at the center of it. It's not something that is just about trees in the forest or just about whales in the ocean or polar bears in the North Pole. It's actually about the way that we live our lives and the way we experience our everyday needs and the way that we are in relation to our neighbors, to the economy, and to the things that are actually some of the most precious and important things to our families.
So you put people back at the center. It's not just about the whales and the iconic sort of things that people know, which is good. But I think people get bogged down not because they see images of whales and trees and and nature. I think they get bogged down with the environment because they see policy, they see paperwork, they see bureaucracy, they see the Paris Agreement. They see all these things that get you away from the whales and the trees and the flowers and et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, what the way that most people, and particularly probably, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have experienced the environment is, through some kind of faraway bureaucracy or a regulatory or government agency or something that they think really has very little to do with them and their everyday lives. And I think that's the way that mainstream environmental organizations have spoken to our communities about the environment, as if it's something out there and not something that you're experiencing every day, and not something that has to do with the things that you really care about.
Right. So instead of being a kind of a very natural thing, it becomes kind of alienating in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. And also something that you're not qualified to have an opinion about, too.
Right,
something that really is, you should just leave that to the experts.
Right. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a creationist. I'm not a, I'm not a PhD. What do I know?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so it almost gives people the excuse not to get involved though, too. Right.
Yeah. Actually, I wrote a little article, a little blog post a few years ago, actually about my own experience with climate change and how I used to think that, even though I am an environmentalist, I've been an environmental justice advocate for 25 years. But for years, I really assumed that the big environmental organizations, with all the lawyers and all the policy people, that they were the ones who were going to take care of climate change. They were going to take care of these big international agreements. They were going to take care of what our federal, lead on what our federal government should be doing. They were going to work with the scientists and they were going to come up with the solutions. And I kind of had this mindset that really the environmental issues that I wanted to be most kind of engrossed in and connected to were the ones that were closest to the communities that I'm in. And, and that's all still true. That, it's like the air we breathe every day. It's the water we drink out of our faucets. It's where our kids go to school. It's the freeways that are twisting around all our neighborhoods. It is all those things. And at the same time, this big issue of climate change that's actually going to have and is already having a huge impact on our communities. I was thinking that someone else was going to take care of that. And when I realized that actually the way that our country, the way that our state, the way that our county, the way that our city is preparing for and also trying to reduce the worst harms of climate change, those are actually really important to my daily life. And they're actually huge opportunities for building an environment and an economy that relate to the needs that I have every day, and that I actually need to, and I need to be part of that. And the communities that are most impacted by these issues actually need to be front and center in those decisions and in those solutions. And it kind of brought back that what I felt like someone else was like, it's going to be taken care of by the experts. And I realized, no, actually, we are the experts. We are the experts in how we want our kids to be able to breathe, the jobs that we are able to have access to, the livable planet that we actually need for everyone.
Well, to the degree that you breathe your air and you know how good or bad it is, you're the expert. So, but
exactly.
Tell us more about your background and how you became an activist and how the environment became your passion. I mean, I guess you grew up in the Bay Area, or?
No, actually, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from the Chicago area, and the first kind of way I got involved or interested in environmental work is kind of unusual. My father is a environmental engineer, and so he used to come home talking about mitigating hazardous waste and like all these projects that he was working on to clean the Great Lakes, or to work on municipal landfills or things that. Or I think one of the first reports that I did in school in science was a report on the impacts of acid rain, and so I had kind of an insight into not just how much damage was being done to our environment, but actually how much people were impacted by industry and by this way that we have of being able to externalize costs or let industry reap the benefits from what they produce without having to pay the cost of the pollution that they produce at the same time. So I had a really early awareness of that, which is kind of unusual.
Well, but it's really also kind of techie too, in a way, because of your father.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of had the your hands on the first draft in some ways.
Yeah, that's right. And then both my parents, I had I was really influenced early on by stories from the civil rights movement, by stories about feminism and about inequality in the United States, and could kind of see that in my own life. And I think what happened was, by the time I was in like maybe 18 or so, I really felt passionate about the combination of those things. And around that time, that was the first time I was working as a canvasser for an environmental organization in the Chicago area. And through that work, started going door to door and talking to people about the environment, and those annoying people that show up at your door and try to get you to sign a petition. Yeah. I was one of those people. But at that time, I also had the real privilege of meeting some incredible organizers on the south side of Chicago who were fighting a very large incinerator that had been polluting the air. And it was in a neighborhood that was just surrounded by, they used to call it a toxic donut. And that really drove home to me not just the impact that this environment was having on the people who live there, but also the inequality. The fact that if you were poor, if you're a person of color, that you're way more likely to be at that intersection of poverty and pollution and racism. And that the people who were organizing at that intersection were just so inspiring to me. The solutions that they were coming up with, in their living rooms late at night, and knocking on doors and talking to their neighbor and building power through just talking about how these issues were affecting their kids and how people were, dying of cancer at early ages. People had asthma, all these things that, were really having an impact on how they were able to thrive and live a healthy life. And they were really doing something about it, and that's really what kind of got me involved in.
And you won? You won that struggle?
They won. Yes, they did. They did. They shut down that incinerator.
And this is something that's interesting, because people don't ordinarily equate the environment with racism. And I remember when I first heard of, environmental racism, it had to do with Black communities. And it didn't dawn on me that it could also affect Asian American communities.
That's right.
But in fact, it does. I mean, especially in the case of what APEN has done in Richmond, and we'll get to that. But let me ask you this, because, most people don't see the environment as related to race. They see it as non-racial. We're all green, right? Why do we need an Asian American group that advocates for the environment? I mean, look, there's, we're just green. There's the air. There's no race aspects to this. And so I'm sure you get this question: why is an Asian American group like APEN even necessary? Aren't you just kind of like, I don't know, kind of grandstanding in a way that's not necessary at all?
Well, I've never gotten quite that, but yes, a lot of questions about like why is it important for Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders to be concerned about the environment more than your average person or more than white communities and I mean the fact is that like other communities of color, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are disproportionately impacted by pollution, by other environmental issues. Everything from, lead in drinking water to air quality by living in really kind of urban environments and near freeways, by, living closest to concrete factories or refineries or other heavily polluting industries that also, by the way, happen to be the polluting industries that are adding the most greenhouse gases to the atmosphere and causing climate change. But they're also causing local pollution that is impacting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the same ways that it is impacting other communities of color. And you can so of course race is central to the way that we're experiencing these issues. And, that's another kind of inspiration that I had early on. There was kind of a seminal study that I was introduced to in the late 80s, that was called Toxic Waste and Race. And it was by Dr. Robert Bullard, who is still doing amazing work today. And the central thesis of the study was that communities of color live closer to hazardous polluting facilities. And if you go by their zip code and look at demographically, like who lives near these facilities, it is like the main factor is race, and it's not, the main factor was not actually income, as everyone would assume. So even if you were middle class and African American, you're more likely to live next to a polluting facility. And the same thing was true for a lot of environmental issues in the Asian American community. And it has shown throughout the decades that we've been doing this work that, our communities are disproportionately polluted, and they're disproportionately vulnerable to these impacts and to the impacts of climate change as well.
So the data suggests it's more race than income, not class. It has nothing to do with how poor an area is. It's just
those things, of course, are related. There's a relationship between race and class. But when you look at data, this study in particular, the study on toxic waste and race, was showing that all these assumptions that we were making, or that policymakers were wanting to make, about the fact that if you're disproportionately impacted, it's because they wanted to leave race out of it. They really want it to be race neutral. And a lot of people feel more comfortable when you're not talking about race. But, if people like Asian Americans and Hispanics and Latinos are actually, there's a very recent EPA study that found that those communities have the greatest percentage of population in counties where air quality did not actually reach EPA standards for particulate matter and for ozone. And so it's still happening. It's not something that was in the past. It's still happening.
Does that amaze you, though? You had Bullard's study, and then you have these current studies. That's a generation ago when that first study that you mentioned came out. And
that's right.
We still haven't kind of redirected our course. We're still doing the same things. That must be a source of frustration for an activist like you, or maybe a source of motivation. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it toggles between both. The inspiration really comes from watching what community leaders are able to do when they are able to speak their truth and to organize and to build power. That's what inspires me. The issues themselves, and especially right now, where actually we had been making some progress, and I actually think that California is still a leader in this arena, and that, because of the organizing that's happened on the ground, we've really pushed our leaders to be much more front and center in these issues of environmental justice and climate. But, it does make me feel very depressed and concerned what is happening at a federal level right now, where, progress that we have been making that is that had been really promising. It's not like we've fixed everything, but it had been really promising for communities across the board and for Asian American and Pacific Islander communities too. And those things are pretty much all under threat right now.
We're talking with Miya Yoshitani. She's the executive director of APEN, which is the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, which is based in Oakland. And we're going to get to those current things that are distressing, but I want to talk about some of the real progress that when I first heard of APEN a few years back, there was a situation in Richmond, and it's ongoing today, but there's been still some great progress in terms of what a community of Southeast Asians were able to do in Richmond. Tell us about what APEN did and how it organized the community. And you even have some of the people who were involved in the first actions who are now leaders of APEN. So tell us about that success story, so we don't get too depressed when we talk about the progress or what's happening now.
Yeah, that's right. So when I came to APEN in 1996, I came to APEN as a youth organizer, and one of the main issues that the young people were concerned about was the pollution coming out of the refinery just down the road. So the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California, is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases in the state. It's also one of the biggest polluters of like local particulate matter. So local pollution, that actually the things that get into your lungs when you breathe the air, and the thing that's actually causing, not just Chevron, there's a lot of industry in the area, but Chevron is the biggest polluter, the biggest single polluter. And, a lot of the young people were noticing that either they or their sisters and brothers or their parents, that their health is being impacted by living on the fence line of this refinery. And we wanted to actually do something about it. And one of the first campaigns that we did was, and this is back in the 90s, going way back. And actually the Laotian community, where the project that we first started working on was called the Laotian Organizing Project. And it was the first organizing project that APEN took on. APEN's now a almost 25-year-old organization. And so this is, 20 some years ago. And we realized that community, the Laotian community, was, like I was saying about, these other broader impacts, that community was being disproportionately impacted by the refinery. And at the same time, this is a community that, and even the young people that I was working with, had mostly at that time been born in refugee camps. They were born in Thailand. They had grown up part of their lives in refugee camps and were relocated to this one part of Richmond. And and for their parents and grandparents who had experienced experienced war, they had experienced bombing, they had experienced chemical attacks as well. And going from that to years spent in a refugee camp, and then to land in Richmond, California, only to be living next door to this major polluter that is constantly, not just constantly spewing pollution into your air, but it's exploding and it's catching on fire, and it's really threatening not just air quality, but threatening the health and safety of the people who live next door and the workers who work inside that refinery. And so one of the first campaigns that we did was the smaller one started as it's such a normal incident that the county had a warning system for when there was an accident at the refinery, and the warning system would call everyone's telephones and give a live message with instructions about what to do. And so the Laotian community members, in the most recent event, we noticed that calls went out, people answered the telephone, the message was in English, they couldn't understand what was happening, and so they absolutely were doing the opposite of what the instructions were. The instructions were shelter in place, close your doors, put a towel under the door to prevent the poisonous air from coming in. And instead, people were opening their doors, walking out into their neighborhood to see what was going on because they could hear the sirens. And we realized that, that was really adding harm to what was already a crisis. And so our first campaign was to win a multilingual warning system. And community members testified in front of, county officials and had said, we have this idea to make this situation better, and organized for a couple of years to actually bring that to fruition. And then later on, as we were building more power and as the community was also engaging more in being in the local democracy, in voting, and in being, really a part of leading the community, we were also able to stop a major upgrade project for the refinery that the refinery Chevron wanted to spend $1 billion upgrading their refinery for burning dirtier, heavier crude because refineries these days need to be able to refine heavier, dirtier crude from places like North Dakota, from the Bakken oil fields, and or from Canada. And we knew that if it's dirty going in, it's dirty going out, and that our community members were going to be, again, disproportionately impacted by that.
You were able
increase.
To change it, right? You were able to.
Yeah, so we were able to stop that that upgrade as planned, and then years later, we're able to get a much better, safer, cleaner upgrade for the refinery. And the work continues.
After 25 years, do you feel like they recognize the Southeast Asian community there and APEN, and do they consult with you now, or do they continue to go on willy-nilly and we'll see where we have to correct as we go? How does it work now?
One of the connections to this is the connection to local democracy and being involved in community members in the Laotian community and in other communities of color in Richmond who have really shifted the local government away from basically voted out the pro-Chevron city council members who were willing to just roll over and do whatever Chevron asked. And so, the answer to your question is that Chevron will continue to do whatever it can. And right. when they consult with us, it's because they have to. It's not because they want to. But now we are in more of a position where we do have to not just be consulted, but where we are actually influencing the decisions that get made about the future of that refinery. And I think the other thing that's really important to this story about a Laotian, a refugee community, an Asian American refugee community that, really was and still does struggle with a lot of economic hardship, unemployment, community violence, a lot of issues. It's not just the pollution; it's a cumulative impact of living at that intersection of racism, poverty, and pollution. And this community bind with, like in alliance with, in collaboration with other communities facing a lot of the same issues, have been able to really make a huge difference and shift the way that decisions are made in their local government, and also to really influence policy about refineries across the state. So it's not just about Richmond, it's about a much broader influence, demonstrating that when people really get involved and they speak about these issues from their heart and from how it's actually impacting them and their families, and they organize for power, and that's what's changing things. And that story is helping to mobilize and influence other communities in other places, and it's also really directed us in like what we fight for in other places in Sacramento.
I have to say, when I first heard that story in the 90s, it did strike me as, well, this is environmental justice, or this is environmental racism, and what do you need to do to get some justice, or at least to move the big corporation in the way that you'd like to see it. But so there's that stays with me from when I first heard this story. And then the second thing is, you mentioned working with other communities, and as we look for common ground, and as we get out of our tendency to stay within our communities or not speak up or not say anything, here's a situation where the community spoke out, but it also made progress because it worked in alliance with other communities of color, which we found the common ground to be the dirty ground we're standing on that's being polluted by the big corporations, in a way. So that's a kind of positive. And am I wrong to say that that's one of the first instances of, Asian American environmental racism? Because I can't think of many others that I've heard of in the news.
Well, I think that if you're looking for something very specific, then it might be the only one. But I think that the way that environmental issues impact Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, it's happening all over the place, and there's fights all over the place too. But they might not call themselves environmental justice, and that's fine. But there's been all kinds of, there's a whole history of organizing of Filipino farm workers, who are being poisoned by, pesticides and chemicals. There's, workers who are exploited in factories and who are exposed to one of our other first campaigns in Oakland was workers who were being exposed to dangerous chemicals working at a semiconductor plant. And so there's a lot, there actually are every day. And even, workers who are exploited on the job, restaurant workers who are exposed to hazardous working conditions. We consider those environmental justice issues. And it's all about how you experience your environment, where you live, work, play, and pray. And those issues actually do fall under the umbrella of environmental justice. It's just that as traditional environmental or conservation issues, people don't usually think of it that way. But there's been lots of organizing. Yeah.
Yeah. If we'll go to your website at APEN, APEN, the number 4, and then EJ, so apen4ej.org, you'll see some of the things you've done. Like you've done some things in the local Oakland Chinatown about housing, for example. How do you make that into an environmental issue?
Well, again, access to housing, access to a place to live, and the conditions, the housing conditions, to us are squarely environmental issues. That is the right and the ability of a family to stay in place in Oakland is just as much affecting their health and well-being as a polluting refinery in Richmond. But the thing is, because all of these issues, because there's again, like environmental justice is really about the cumulative impact. So it is a housing issue, and sometimes it's also the indoor air quality in that housing, because the house is next to 10 different freeways. And so there's the magic of environmental justice is actually that it acts as a way to bring intersecting issues together. And so we have, we consider in Chinatown, where there is a huge issue with displacement and gentrification right now. And some of that is actually driven by the very same policies that are meant to clean up the air, which is ironic. So when the city is trying to help build more walkable, livable cities near public transit, that's like a great idea, and we want to be part of that. And yet when you do develop the city in that way, it also raises prices to the extent where people who lived there before can't live there anymore. And so you're creating this healthy, walkable city in trying to also save vehicle miles traveled and all these technical terms about keeping cars off the roads and all that stuff. That is great, and we want that. But the equity angle on that is that if you're building our new kind of climate resilient cities for the people who are going to live there, but not for the people who live there right now, then you haven't created an equitable solution to climate change.
One of the things you're also working on in Oakland, they have some kind of anti-coal ordinance. Explain how that works, and because that's maybe the last thing I would think of that would come up in Oakland, an anti-coal. Coal in Oakland. It's like farms in Berkeley, right?
Yeah.
What is that about?
Well, what that is about is there is a old Army base that was going to be redeveloped, and and organizations joined together throughout Oakland and created a really great plan for redeveloping that old Army base in a way that created a lot of jobs for local residents. It created training programs for local residents to be able to access those jobs, and a good plan for the local economy. And at the same time, there was a particular developer who was brought in, Phil Tagami, who promised up and down during the decision making that the rail terminal that was going to be redeveloped for export of, it's called a logistics center, that it was not going to involve anything hazardous like coal. It was actually even brought up in some of the early discussions, and the developer said, no, we have no plans. There's nothing, we don't plan on trying to export coal through Oakland. That would be ridiculous. And then as soon as it was passed, lo and behold, there was a plan to export coal through a coal terminal as part of that development. And as you rightly do, everyone was incredulous. Why would Oakland, a city that is, known for being progressive, for being forward thinking, why would we want to bring coal through our neighborhoods, and especially, through those rail neighborhoods where, dragging coal through Oakland, of course, it doesn't magically appear in Oakland. You'd have to bring it through the whole rail line, and that affects a lot of people. But in particular, people in West Oakland who are already, suffering from really poor air quality from living next to the port and all of the diesel trucks and traffic that surround that area. And, it just seems antithetical to what the values of the city are. But it was a deal that developer made, and he is determined to see it through, even though nobody wants it. And so that was what the city council responded to. And they said, actually, we're looking at the health impacts of having coal brought through by rail through the city, and the impacts that it would have, and the weighing the economic benefits versus, what the other. And also, like, there's a lot of fear too that would actually damage other, economic and development projects. If you're bringing coal through, that kind of ruins a lot of the plans for the city as being a, sustainable, healthy, thriving city center. And yeah.
Does it make a difference if, they're not burning coal, are they? They're just bringing it through.
They're bringing it through, but there's a huge amount of particulate pollution that comes through just the handling of coal. Coming from Chicago, this is something that I know. There's it doesn't just cleanly, magically go from one place to another. There's historically huge problems with the transport of coal. As you know, it's dangerous. And it creates a lot of dust that creates particulate matter that, in particular, elderly and children are vulnerable to. It creates it can cause asthma. It can cause all kinds of health problems. And then the other thing about it is that the transport and the unloading and then the export of coal out of Oakland really doesn't create that many jobs. Most of those jobs will be mechanized. And any of the construction jobs going into this, those jobs can be applicable to anything that you build. It doesn't have to be a coal export terminal. And the ongoing jobs, though, it just is, it's a false notion that jobs will be created from this project. It's mostly going to be done by robots,
Yeah, but this is one of the things you're trying to stop now, this coal, anti-coal move in Oakland. And so the Chinatown instance with the housing, people can read that on your website. And Richmond is not over either, right? I mean, that's an ongoing thing to struggle against Chevron.
Yeah, I would say, yes, it is an ongoing struggle. And the most important part of the struggle is the struggle for what we want, not just what we don't want in Richmond. Mm-hmm. So it's really about a long-term campaign to build the city in a way that is bringing kind of the most benefits from the local economy and the local environment to as many of Richmond's residents as possible. And, that's really the exciting work. It's about building new infrastructure for renewable energy, for, clean water, for food systems that, where you grow locally and you grow organic and you create new jobs for formerly incarcerated youth, or there's all these really great solutions that are at our fingertips and that we're learning how to do, and to build transit systems with union labor and all this. There's a lot to be done in Richmond. That's the propositional work. It's the visionary work. It's the creating the local living economy that we all want. And that's going to help with getting rid of the worst of what we don't want.
But how about, you have more than 25 years now, or almost, since you've been able to monitor what Chevron has done, what the impacts have been to the health of the community. Has there been anything done on the adverse effects on people's health that you can now quantify and say, look, in a generation, we've got all of X, Y, and Z because, that plant, failed to mitigate, or failed to address emissions problems. Is there anything like that you've done?
Well, we worked really closely at different times with the county, who've been the health department and there's actually a huge amount of interest in, kind of research and quantifying the air quality, especially really localized testing of air quality and the impacts of that. One thing that is really, so yes, we have been involved in a lot of those things, especially through participatory community research where community members are actually able to get out and do their own kind of ground truthing of research and talk to their neighbors about their health issues, and going around kind of making sure that academic research actually reflects the reality of what people are living on a day-to-day basis, and coming up with the right solutions. And there's still a long way to go, and some of what's challenging about a place like Richmond, in terms of quantifying, you do X and you get Z result, is that there are just so many different inputs for health hazards. It's again, like, I hate to repeat over and over, but it's the cumulative impacts.
Right.
But
over 25 years, you don't have instances of more deaths or more instances of cancer, or, is it a...
Oh, of course.
Is it a hot spot, or, deformities, or, because of the pollution? Is there anything like that you can say, look...
yes, it has one of the highest rates of asthma in the state, and it also just had its local hospital close, which is so tragic. And I mean, that's why all these issues are related, right? Access to healthcare, as well as just the very nature of the polluted air that you breathe that's causing. And we do see really high rates of not just asthma, but other cancer clusters. There's a lot of pulmonary and cardiac disease. There's really high rates of actually most of the types of health issues that you see that are correlated with air pollution. And air pollution around the world, kills millions of people.
See, and this is the important thing, to link what's happening locally to what's happening throughout the world, to the earth. And it brings us back to our discussion of Earth Day 2017, which to me, this must be one of the most critical Earth Days in years, right?
Yeah,
right now.
It is.
I mean, you have the Trump effect, which has to be the overarching issue in the environment, from the EPA to, climate change denying to coal. So tell me, how does the Trump effect, which I like to call one of the biggest political greenhouse gases in existence, after Bill O'Reilly, or I know maybe Bill O'Reilly was second to Trump. But what is an organization like APEN's strategy to mitigate all this, as we come to Earth Day 2017?
Well, part of what we have done that is helping right now in the state is that we've organized our communities to force our leaders and legislators to consider environmental justice and to be leaders in this arena. And so you've seen the governor, you've seen the Senate pro tem, you've seen the leader of the assembly in the state of California come out with very strong statements in light of the Trump election that says California is going to maintain its leadership in environmental issues and climate and equity. We are not going to back down. And that's what's happened, is that we've been able to provide the cover and support for them to be out in leadership of saying that, and also the legislature itself, putting together a whole package of legislation that's basically a resistance agenda to the Trump agenda. And one of those things is, just one example, is legislation that says, basically, if the federal government is going to roll back its regulations on things like air quality and clean water, California will maintain our standards at a equal or higher level than whatever the existing government standards are. It's just saying like California is not going to roll back. And I think that's really important, obviously, for the state and for the health and safety of the residents of the state of California. But it's also really important for the rest of the country to see California's stance. And I think the part of the reason that our representatives are in that position is because we put them there. It's because of organizing, and I think that's the moment that we're in right now too, where it's not just environmental issues. It's the cumulative impacts. It's going to be the destruction of healthcare. It's attacks on immigrants, and it's attacks on Muslim residents of the state. We're all kind of in the crosshairs right now of the Trump administration, and we have to hang together, and we have to continue to push our leaders to take as strong a role as we need them to right now in this moment.
We're talking with Miya Yoshitani, the executive director of APEN, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. Miya is we're talking about Earth Day and talking about how easy it is for people to be overwhelmed, almost to the point of being paralyzed. What does APEN do say to encourage people to take that first step, that grassroots, right where they are kind of activism?
And we really emphasize that this is the floor, not the ceiling. This is the way that you get in is voting. We talk to tens of thousands of Asian American voters at every election about these issues, and we ask people to participate in democracy, to have our voices heard on these issues. And all the kind of polling suggests that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders actually really care about they care about air quality, they care about environmental issues in general, and they care about climate, and they care about the way that their government is addressing these issues in a serious way. And they also are willing to pay more in taxes to fix the problem. And so we talk to these folks and say, your voice is needed. You need to show up at the polls. And then we go back and say, now that you've done that, here's some other things that you can be involved in. And here's a way that you can talk to your legislators. Here's a way that you can get involved in local government. Here's a way that you can influence policy and get people involved, and talk to your neighbors about it, and talk to your families about it. And I think another thing for APEN is that we're very unique in that our local community members, whenever we get together, we use hundreds of headsets for translation equipment, because all our meetings when we get together are in usually 5 languages at least when we're meeting together. And sometimes when we meet, like just our Richmond members alone, there's 3 languages spoken at every meeting.
So they're speaking Mian, Lao,
Khmu.
Oh yeah,
and English, yeah.
Wow.
And same in Chinatown, Mandarin, Cantonese, English, and you bring them all together.
For Asian Americans in particular, no matter what the struggle, no matter what the fight, if you're dealing on a federal or a governmental level, statewide, local, the importance of translation, because we are an immigrant community, is almost like the first thing. If you don't get that, you don't have communication, and people don't get the word. It's
yeah, that's right. And then people are left out of the conversation. And that's one of the reasons that we do our electoral programs in 3 languages. Because all the environmental groups who like reach out to voters during elections, they don't reach out to our communities in language. And so for some of the people that we've talked to, actually predominantly most of the people that we talk to on the phones during elections or after elections, we're probably the first contact that they've ever had with an environmental organization. They have just never heard anything. And that's another reason why Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are left out of the conversations. No one is talking to them, and partly because they're not talking to them in their language.
So is it a matter of people being neglected, or is it a matter of people are so into their own lives and that they don't have time to care or get involved? What do you think? Because sometimes that happens too, where people don't think it's important. I mean, and if you look at what's happening at people's mother countries, and I'm talking specifically about China, for some, the largest Asian American group, there's a kind of indifference. It's changing, but it does exist when you talk about how they pollute in places like China and Hong Kong. Do you see that? Do you see that indifference carrying on here among Asian Americans, or do you think that's changing?
Well, I would say I've seen it in Asian American communities just as much as I've seen it in any other community. So I don't think there's anything unique about indifference in Asian American communities. But what I do find is that when you talk to Asian American communities and Pacific Islander communities about these issues through a lens that allows them to see themselves in it, where they care about it because they see the connection to their own lives, to their own health, to their own jobs, their own wealth, and they see it related to the things that they do really care about, and then people are very motivated to be engaged and involved.
So as we approach this Earth Day, or as we come to it, how do you say, I mean, I think often is we got to get people thinking that Earth Day is every day. So, respect for the environment. I mean, I'm driving a hybrid car or taking mass transit, or I guess people can eat vegetarian, lower the methane gas from the cows. How do you think people can make Earth Day every day so that it's not, because there's celebrations that will go on, no doubt, but how can they celebrate Earth Day every day?
I have a particular view on the change the world by changing your light bulbs or change the world by recycling. I just feel like that is such a disempowering message in some ways, because if that's all I can do, it doesn't feel like very much, really, if all I can do to impact something that's so important. So of course, there are small things, and I live with that contradiction by, myself also trying to, reduce waste, and we have solar panels on our house. But I actually feel like the most important thing that people can do is just be involved, is just have their voices heard. That has such a huge impact on the issues and how we're able to develop a powerful response and voice to the vision that we have. And I think that's the major hurdle. And sometimes, even if it's just, I went to the polls for the first time and I participated in an election, that's kind of like the gateway drug to engagement. There's lots of other ways too, but like write a letter to your congressman, or an email, or write a letter, show up to your city council meeting, show up to your kids' PTA meetings, where these are places where these decisions are actually being made, where they're making choices about energy use, about water, about the things that will create a healthier, cleaner environment for your family. And I think most importantly, engaging on issues that are very, very local, and at the same time engaging in issues that are bigger than us, that bring us together, that help us be with other, because there's so much concern right now, post Trump election, and people are feeling somewhat, overwhelmed, or feeling like they can't do anything. There's just so much coming at us every day, so much new, executive orders and bombings and wars and, getting out of climate agreements. And, it just seems like there's just too much happening all at once. And so I think starting where you can to just be engaged is actually the thing that you can do every day. And it doesn't mean a major sacrifice for it doesn't mean that you have to quit your job, or you have to say goodbye to your family and join the environmental justice movement. It means, though, that you are paying attention, and that where you can, you're having your voice heard. And I think that's really important for Asian American and Pacific Islanders to hear, because I feel like we've been kind of made invisible in a lot of ways in politics, in policy, and in media in general, and we have to that's a bigger barrier for us to overcome. But I think showing up is what's needed.
Great, showing up, right? That's the old line. It's everything, just showing up. Yeah. But tell me, how can people work with APEN? How can people get in touch with you guys and say, hey, help me direct my volunteerism, or help me direct my action?
You can definitely go to our website, apen4ej.org, and you can sign up for our mailing list. You can donate if you feel inspired. You can find out the information that we're getting as we get it. And we also are connected to organizations in 4 regions across the state. So through Los Angeles, Central Valley, the Sacramento Delta area, and in the Bay Area.
How about people nationally? Can they work with you guys?
Oh, yeah. We're part of multiple alliances that are national, the Climate Justice Alliance, and we're part of a statewide alliance called the California Environmental Justice Alliance. And we have, the Climate Justice Alliance has groups all over the country in every state, and we're all kind of coming from these same, like, very similar local experiences of organizing at this intersection of racism, poverty, and pollution, and coming together for a stronger influence on the national scale.
All right. Now, this may come across as a joke, but it isn't really. It's related to air quality. I live in an area where there is a dog food factory. They make dog food. And you can tell when they're cooking dog food because it smells like dog food. Now, dog food after it's digested is bad, but dog food before it's digested is also very bad. And the stench is really pronounced. It's real. And I used to joke about it because, dog food, it smells okay, great. But we also live near dairy farms, and dairy farms also smell. And we also know that what is emitted from dairy farms into the air is not, it's not as benign as people think.
No, methane is really...
Methane is a real problem.
It's a very intense pollutant.
Yeah, it contributes to the greenhouse effect. So my question is do you know anything about dog food air pollution? Because I'm concerned about it, because I'm sure that they'll do something about the particulates. Like you mentioned that coal particulates are deadly.
Yeah.
I was just I wanted to put it in the back of your head. You represent people people who live near dog food factories. Maybe they need to be concerned, and maybe we need to
I don't mean to laugh. Actually, it's air quality is a really serious issue. And in the Central Valley has some of the worst air quality of the state. And
right there by the freeways, right there, but they've got.
Well, the freeways. It's also kind of the air flow patterns of the state. Like you get all of the Bay Area pollution, and agriculture is a huge contributor to poor air quality. In the Central Valley, right. And there's fracking, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, the air quality in Bakersfield is horrendous.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. One of the worst in the state, for sure. And I think that you have a right to know what is causing that odor and that smell, because that's a quality of life issue. I think a lot of times people get turned away from information because the local agency might just say, oh, well, we've tested it and it's up to standard, it's fine, which by the way, it's probably not. But even if they say that, but the fact that you're experiencing your air quality in that way, it's not the way that, why should you have to live with that when other people are able to breathe clean air? Like, why should you have to?
I'm starting a new career as a dog food air pollution activist.
There you go.
So I'm reaching out to all of those who live near a dog food factory.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I can only imagine. I don't even want to think about what is causing that, but it's probably not good. And again, it's the cumulative impact. Right. So it's not just a dog food factory. It's the dairy farms. It's the other pollution. It's right. It's going to be all the things all at the same time. And people deserve better.
I just want to ask you this question because you've been an activist all your life for the environment, and I just want to know how people like yourself stay optimistic when you see the government's attitude change with Trump's, with how he mouths off about how his policies are really, going backwards in terms of the environment, and, putting short-term profits over, long-term sustainability. So what do you do to stay sane and to keep up the optimism in the fight? Because this is going to go on for generations, maybe beyond our own lives. How do you stay optimistic?
Well, you're right. I mean, there's a lot to be angry about, and it's easy to kind of just be full of rage all the time. But that's not sustainable. What actually keeps me in this work is the love and respect I have for our members and for the communities and the leaders who are so courageous to speak out on the impacts that they're experiencing every day, and they don't give up. So how could I? And there's so much love in this work. There is love, laughter, music, food. It's about the community that you're part of. And I think for people who are feeling overwhelmed and sad, it's like really basic, connect with other human beings. And that's how you stay inspired. I have 2 teenage daughters who are about to move into this world. They're about to inherit all of this, the good, bad, the ugly of what I've been a part of for the past several decades. And, I could not look them in the eye without knowing that I had tried my absolute best to create the world that they deserve.
So what are you doing for Earth Day?
For Earth Day, we're going to spend it outdoors, of course. I'm going to try to, we're planning on doing some work in our garden and, really trying to take advantage of all this amazing rain that we've had lately.
Right. Everything's green.
And then we'll be out in the streets, for the climate march and for May Day, immigrant rights.
Miya Yoshitani of the Asian Pacific Environmental Network on Earth Day and how Asian Americans can get involved fighting for environmental justice. And that is our program. We're on iTunes. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends about the show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok, or go to the ALDEF blog at www.aldef.org/blog. And give us your feedback on www.amok.com. Leave a message on SpeakPipe. You don't need a phone. Thanks again for joining us on episode 10. Thanks for listening to Emil Amok's Takeout. I'm Emil Guillermo.